Russia just made a move nobody expected. A move so desperate it shocked military experts. This was not strength. This was pressure. When a global power reaches this stage, history gives a clear signal. Wars do not end loudly. They collapse quietly. And this moment might already prove the war is over. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about a moment that could define the future of this war. Many people think wars end with peace talks or surrender announcements, but history shows something very different. Wars usually end when one side is pushed into choices it once avoided. This is why Russia's recent move has caused serious discussion among analysts. This was not a confident action. It was a reaction under pressure. Strong nations protect options. Weak positions force leaders to act in ways that show desperation. Desperation does not look powerful. It looks rushed, loud, and defensive. Analysts noticed that instead of changing the battlefield, this move exposed deeper problems like supply strain, manpower stress, and limited strategic choices. Official messaging continues to project control, but actions reveal reality. When leadership relies on extreme steps, it often means previous strategies failed. This channel focuses on calm analysis, not emotional reactions. Today's video is about understanding what this moment really signals. We are not saying fighting stops tomorrow, but history shows similar moments marked the beginning of the end, even when conflicts dragged on afterward. This section builds the foundation for why this single decision matters more than headlines, because wars are decided long before the final announcement. To understand why this decision matters, we need to discuss desperation in military planning. Desperation appears when original goals become unreachable through normal operations. Commanders then shift focus from progress to impact, meaning actions are meant to send messages rather than achieve territory. Analysts studying this action notice timing issues, rushed execution, and limited follow-up support. These signs point to pressure rather than confidence. Powerful militaries avoid revealing last options because once exposed, they lose leverage. This move did the opposite. It revealed constraints instead of dominance. Historically, similar moments occurred in conflicts where one side slowly lost initiative yet continued fighting outwardly. These actions were designed to influence morale at home and abroad rather than change battlefield reality. When leadership relies on extreme steps, it sends a signal that traditional strategies failed. This section examines how global experts interpret such moves and why the broader world sees them as markers of weakness. We also consider the psychological effect on troops, command structures, and civilian perception. The contrast between projected confidence and observable limitation can change the course of negotiations, alliances, and local dynamics. Recognizing these patterns is crucial to understanding why this moment may already signal a turning point. As we move deeper into the analysis, it becomes clear that Russia's current position is strained in multiple areas. Analysts note that logistical challenges, equipment shortages, and troop morale are all factors limiting their options. When a powerful nation begins showing cracks in supply lines or coordination, it signals a vulnerability that can change the course of conflict. Observers have highlighted that decisions appearing aggressive or bold are often driven by necessity rather than strategy. In this case, the recent action does not show a shift in control, but rather a reaction to pressure on multiple fronts. Military experts emphasize that leadership under duress may make choices that seem irrational externally, but are intended to maintain stability internally. This section examines how pressure affects decision-making in warfare and why repeated extreme measures indicate diminishing alternatives. Historical parallels demonstrate that when a nation resorts to unconventional or last resort tactics, it rarely signals renewed strength. Instead, it marks the beginning of a strategic plateau, where continued efforts cannot easily reverse the underlying trajectory. Understanding these dynamics is key to evaluating whether Russia's latest move represents a turning point, a final maneuver, or an escalation born out of necessity. Analysts remain cautious but agree that the indicators of stress are undeniable, and the broader implications could shape both immediate engagements and long-term outcomes. Another critical aspect to consider is the role of international perception and the reactions of allies. When nations act under extreme pressure, it is not only their own forces that notice, but also foreign governments, allies, and adversaries. Each move communicates both intent and capacity, and misreading these signals can have strategic consequences. In Russia's case, observers report that allies have remained quiet, suggesting concern or disapproval. Historically, when a major power executes desperate measures, global partners tend to recalibrate their support, evaluate risk, and in some cases distance themselves. Analysts point out that maintaining credibility on the international stage is as important as local battlefield gains. Every action under duress sends messages about stability, resourcefulness, and leadership strength. Extreme choices may temporarily project confidence to domestic audiences, but global eyes interpret these moves differently. The contrast between domestic messaging and international interpretation can weaken influence, shift alliances, and affect negotiations. Experts emphasize that the pressure created by dwindling options can accelerate diplomatic changes, impact sanctions discussions, and alter military coordination. This section explains how a single decision, while tactical in nature, resonates far beyond the battlefield, influencing perceptions and the broader trajectory of the war in ways that may indicate a decline in strategic control. Examining the military timeline reveals that repeated reliance on extreme measures tends to erode operational effectiveness. Commanders under pressure often push resources beyond safe thresholds, risking exhaustion, mismanagement, and vulnerability. Analysts observing the current conflict note patterns of rapid deployments without adequate preparation, emergency maneuvers, and shifts in standard protocols. These are classic signs of forces adapting under constraint rather than executing deliberate strategy. Over time, such patterns reduce cohesion, strain logistics, and make recovery increasingly difficult. The psychological impact on troops is significant. Morale fluctuates between fear, uncertainty, and a sense of urgency, while the command structure faces increased stress to maintain control. Historically, armies demonstrating overextension in response to pressure rarely reverse course without external relief, often resulting in incremental losses rather than swift victories. Evaluating Russia's recent decisions through this lens suggests that these actions were not markers of strength, but of limitation. Military analysts stress that while outward appearances may project confidence, repeated reliance on drastic measures signals the narrowing of alternatives. Recognizing these warning signs helps observers understand the broader trajectory of the war and provides insight into why some experts consider the conflict to have already entered a phase where momentum is no longer clearly on Russia's side, highlighting the significance of strategic exhaustion and limited options. Psychological and informational factors play a critical role in modern conflicts. Decisions that seem aggressive are often intended to influence perception rather than alter immediate outcomes. Analysts point out that Russia's recent choice appears designed to project strength internally while concealing weaknesses externally. Media coverage, propaganda, and public statements are all tools that amplify or obscure intent. However, when actions contradict messaging, the effect is counterproductive, signaling vulnerability instead of confidence. Observers note that repeated reliance on extreme measures, combined with inconsistent narratives, can create confusion among both troops and citizens, weakening morale and trust. In addition, adversaries interpret these patterns as indicators of strategic stress, allowing them to anticipate responses and adjust their own tactics accordingly. History shows that perception management is as important as battlefield success, and failures in this area accelerate the decline of influence and control. By examining these factors, analysts highlight that the war's trajectory may already be determined not solely by combat outcomes, but by the combination of psychological, operational, and informational pressures. Understanding the interplay between internal messaging, public perception, and observable actions is essential for interpreting the significance of Russia's recent moves and why they may signal the beginning of a broader shift in the conflict's balance of power. Logistical and strategic limitations are increasingly evident in Russia's current approach. Analysts have observed delays in supply chains, bottlenecks in reinforcements, and inconsistent coordination between units. These factors indicate that the leadership is forced to compensate with emergency measures rather than calculated strategies. When a nation faces multiple constraints, decisions that appear bold or offensive are often reactions to circumstances rather than proactive moves. Historical examples demonstrate that when powerful nations repeatedly rely on last resort measures, it signals a plateau in strategic options and foreshadows eventual decline. Observers also note that repeated reliance on extreme measures can create predictable patterns that adversaries exploit. Over time, this undermines operational flexibility and diminishes the effectiveness of conventional tactics. Furthermore, the psychological toll on commanders and troops can affect discipline, responsiveness, and initiative. Morale is a subtle but crucial factor in sustaining long-term engagements, and evidence shows that uncertainty and visible strain erode confidence. Analysts suggest that this combination of logistical stress, operational pressure, and psychological strain reinforces the interpretation that recent actions are driven by necessity rather than strategy. Recognizing these dynamics is essential for understanding why experts suggest the war may have already reached a point where momentum is no longer clearly in Russia's favor, emphasizing the importance of evaluating not just battlefield outcomes, but the structural realities shaping military choices and the broader trajectory of the conflict. Another significant factor is the role of domestic perception in Russia's decision-making process. Leadership often frames extreme actions as demonstrations of strength to maintain public confidence and political control. Analysts emphasize that projecting authority internally is critical when facing pressure on multiple fronts, both militarily and economically. However, the contrast between internal messaging and external realities can create cognitive dissonance among the public and within institutions. Experts note that when actions contradict official narratives, trust in leadership may decline, affecting compliance, morale, and overall stability. Additionally, repeated use of high-risk measures can signal vulnerability, even if intended as strategic signaling. International observers interpret these signals differently, often viewing them as indicators of constrained options rather than strength. The combination of domestic communication, observable military strain, and public perception forms a complex dynamic that influences both internal cohesion and external interactions. This section examines how these factors interact, explaining why analysts are attentive not only to battlefield events, but also to the broader context of governance, messaging, and strategic signaling. Understanding the domestic dimension is crucial to evaluating why this moment may represent a tipping point in the conflict, where internal pressures compound operational limitations and affect the broader trajectory of Russia's military strategy in ways that are difficult to reverse. Examining historical parallels helps contextualize Russia's recent actions. Throughout history, powerful nations have reached points where continued fighting is possible, but strategic initiative is lost. Analysts cite conflicts in which reliance on extreme measures signaled the narrowing of options and the onset of eventual decline. These moments often involve rapid deployments, emergency maneuvers, and reliance on unconventional tactics to maintain appearances. While such actions may temporarily influence morale or create the illusion of momentum, they rarely reverse underlying challenges. Experts point out that the contrast between messaging and observable limitations often accelerates loss of influence and shapes adversary behavior. In the current context, Russia's repeated choices under pressure indicate structural stress that goes beyond isolated events. Supply constraints, operational limitations, and psychological pressures converge to create a scenario where momentum is no longer sustainable. Observers emphasize that understanding these historical patterns is key to evaluating whether the war may already be over in practical terms. While fighting continues, the strategic balance and trajectory appear increasingly constrained. By comparing current events with historical analogs, analysts can interpret the recent actions not as signs of renewed strength, but as markers of the narrowing of options, signaling a phase where continued efforts are unlikely to alter the overall outcome of the conflict. Finally, we consider the broader implications of these developments. The combination of operational constraints, psychological pressures, domestic messaging, and historical patterns suggests that Russia's recent decisions may indicate that the war has already reached a critical phase. Analysts note that while combat continues, the balance of momentum appears to have shifted, making it increasingly difficult for Russia to achieve its original objectives. This understanding is essential for observers, policymakers, and the global audience seeking to evaluate the trajectory of the conflict. Extreme measures under pressure often reflect necessity rather than strategy, signaling a transition from proactive control to reactive management. The implications extend beyond immediate military outcomes to include international perception, alliances, and domestic stability. Understanding these dynamics helps explain why experts believe the war's outcome may already be determined in practical terms. Before we conclude, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe for more detailed breakdowns and analysis of current global events. Your support allows us to continue providing calm, insightful perspectives on the most important issues affecting our world today. Stay informed, stay critical, and join the conversation as we continue to track these developments and provide context that goes beyond the headlines.